Welcome to From the Mind of Christine McConnell. In today's episode, we are going to tackle the bedding in that guest room that we did. And it's really, really important to have just lovely bedding in any room that either you are sleeping in or company is staying in, just because it makes a big difference. I found some sheets that I really, really love, but they don't sell them in a lot of different colors. So I'm going to tackle dyeing a set of these. So that's how we're going to start this episode. A brand that I found that I really, really like is called Bowl and Branch. And I ordered this particular set, and they're kind of like an off-white creamy color. And so in order to dye them, I went to the local Tractor Supply and got these big giant feed buckets. Now I'm filling them with water, adding some vinegar, some laundry detergent, and this water is about as hot as I could get it. I boiled a bunch of water on the stove, brought it out here and poured it in. And from there, I'm going to put in some dye, mix it together, and then I can start doing some test strips. So this was kind of an expensive sheet set, and I am really afraid of, just experimenting with it, but I figured out a really great way to do that without risking, obviously, destroying the sheets and wasting a ton of money. And that is, you can buy 1 or 2 king-size pillowcases, and then basically just lay it out. The side that opens, don't touch that. On the end, you just cut off enough to make that king-size pillowcase a standard size. You just sew that end closed, and now you have a good amount of that fabric that you can sort of experiment with until it looks just right. I didn't have a chance to film that process when I originally did it, so just to kind of give you a visual reference, I figured I'd just do it again with another one of my pillowcases from a separate set. So the way that I do this is just like I said, I cut off just that end, and later I will sew that other piece of the pillowcase closed again. And then I just cut this into multiple strips, and then I should be ready to go. This took quite a bit of experimenting, but eventually I did hone it down to an exact amount of time that the fabric needed to float around in the dye before it achieved that color. And then once I had done that, I was actually ready to start dyeing the real sheets. I dyed a few other panels of fabric before I did this, and I realized I think I wanted something like a larger dye bath, so I used these even larger feed bins. And from there, I needed to actually soak the sheets first so that they became fully saturated with water before transferring them over to the real dye bath. I was so incredibly worried when I started doing this because initially it kind of looked a little splotchy, but I noticed that as I continued manipulating it and sort of swishing it around in the dye bath, it eventually started to seem to even out and begin to take on a really pretty color. Once the time was up, I transferred it back over into the rinse bin, got it all nice and clean, and then hung it out to dry. So I will tell you something that I realized about this is the sheets, once they're soaking wet, are incredibly heavy. So I think of myself as strong, but when I tried like pulling and moving them back and forth, it turned out it was kind of a bigger task than I realized. All right, thankfully that just worked out perfectly. I was terrified to do that, by the way. And luckily, I just absolutely love the color. So now that we've done that, we're now going to dye the comforter and the shams that go on the bed. I picked this setup from a company called High End, and I thought they were going to be like an olive green color, which I was excited about before I kind of had figured out like the color tone for the room. But when they arrived, they were this kind of color in between brown and green. So my option, I thought, was to put them in a dye bath filled with a lot of pink, and that would shift that green more towards a brown, and that would kind of just flow with the room a little better. This kind of worked, but still it just wasn't really the shade that I wanted. So I ended up adding a whole lot more dye to a very large bath and just kept experimenting until I finally got a color I liked. All right, with that all done, now we can go about embellishing some of these pillow shams. A couple years ago, I reworked the pillows and cushions on my couch for my old living room, and I wanted to do something like that for the pillow shams on this bed. And so it's really a pretty simple process of just making these strips, making obviously like a set, sewing them together, and then starting to sort of pin them and affix them. Okay, the way you get this measurement is really simple, and you can do it with pretty much any pillow. You just start from this point to this point, measure that, and then double it, and that's going to be the flat side of your pattern. And the curvy side is going to kind of go a little bit further out and extend in order for it to flare. Once they've all been pinned together, then you can take them into the sewing machine and start sewing that all together. One little note I will give you is that the spacing on my stitch, I always space it to the max when I'm doing something like this, because different types of fabrics, especially velvets, want to kind of shift around. And so if you work with a stitch that's very wide, it will happen very quickly and there's less opportunity for it to kind of start catching and moving around on you. After I had done that first kind of wide stitch, then I did run over everything once more with a tighter stitch just to make sure that it was super secure. After all of my pieces were sewn, I could flip them inside out, and then I'm going to press them with just a little bit of steam and not too much heat to kind of flatten them out and make them a little bit easier to work with. The last thing I'm going to do before starting to affix this to the actual pillow sham is I'm going to pin everything down so it's nice and flat and I know it's all coming together well. And then I'm going to run one of those kind of basting wide stitches on the sewing machine all the way down, and this is just going to hold those layers together and make the hand sewing part go a lot easier. The way I'm going to get these on the shams is I pin the corners first, and then after I've done all four corners, then I take a tape measure and I find the center, and then I lift up the whole thing kind of like a tent, and then I just pin that down right in the center, and I continue to do that. Every time I pin something, I lift it up, make a little tent, find the center, come right down and pin it, and then I just fold the pleats in any direction that I like, and then once that's all done, then you can actually start stitching it together with your hands. As a general rule, I really like hand stitching. It's kind of a tedious, mindless, sort of fun thing to do, and you can listen to a good audiobook while you work. But this went on so long because there were 5 total fairly large pillows to work on. And so I thought this was going to be just this quick little tiny project that was going to take me a day or 2 at the most. And it ultimately ended up taking me a full week just to get these pillow shams in the shape that I wanted them in. To secure all of my hand stitching, I did run over all of that stitching once more just with the sewing machine. I used a little bit of fray check on the base, or basically the root of where these ruffles meet the sham. And the reason for that is there was a little bit of an unfinished kind of hem, I want to say. And obviously you're going to wash this a lot, and I didn't want it at any point coming undone. To fully conceal that unfinished hem, I'm going over it with a braided piping, and this is just going to it'll obviously cover up that little sort of unsightliness, and then just add kind of a decorative element that ultimately makes the whole pillow look really polished. How you turn the corner with this piping makes a big difference in how this pillow is going to look finished. And so what I like to do is I pinch off just a little bit extra of the piping before making the turn. And that kind of gives you a little bit more flexibility to get something super sharp, as opposed to maybe it just looking a little too curved and maybe not as clean and tidy. Should you ever need a fabric weight, Professor Poof is always the man for the job. Okay, all of our bedding is ready to go, and now it's time to assemble the bed. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to iron the sheets. This might seem really impractical, and it is time consuming. I really like ironing, so if you don't mind ironing, then it's not going to be terrible. But it's like little things like this that ultimately just make an experience basically of sleeping in your house, whether it's for yourself or a guest. And it just makes staying in your home a really nice place to be. I've always really liked ironing, but I've never had a really great iron until last year. I came across one of these Rowenta Pro like steamer iron things, and it's got a separate water tank, which just means the steam never ends, and it's terrific because you're never waiting for it to heat up again. It just keeps going and going. There were a few bad reviews on it, which kind of concerned me, but so far it's given me no trouble. And it just makes ironing go really, it's all the fun part with none of the tedious, not great part. I've always liked tackling the worst parts of a job first and then enjoying all of the best parts later. And so that is why I always iron the fitted sheet first, which is obviously, it's the worst because that elastic just makes it such a struggle to get nice and clean looking. So I wish I could give some great advice on how to iron these perfectly, but the truth is I just slowly go at it, pulling that elastic straight and then just covering everything until it looks nice and smooth. The washer unfortunately doesn't always get every little bit of cat hair, so if that happens, I like to run over anything with a lint roller just to pick up anything else that might be clinging to the fabric. Because I don't want any cat hair on a guest bed, I'm not going to do my typical bed making ritual, which always involves a cat. It's now Poof, but it used to be Biggles. And what they both seem to do is I will put down a layer, they will jump in under that layer and like watch the balloon sort of slowly deflate. And then I'll tuck everything in, get it nice and smooth, and then slip my hands under and remove the strange looking lump, set it on top of that layer, and then just do another layer on top of that. And I don't know why they both love doing this, but it is so cute and fun. It obviously makes it take longer to make the bed, but it just adds a little bit of happiness to my life, and they sure seem to like it. The pillowcases and the top hem are the most important when ironing, so if you spend any extra time on anything, that's the area to focus. Oh, let me give you a really great tip that I picked up while I was at Claridge's in London last summer with my mom, and that is to scent your ironing water with a really nice clean fragrance. A fragrance that I really like using for this is called Honeysuckle by Caswell Massey. You start by pouring a little bit of alcohol in a glass jar, and then with a funnel and a gloved hand, you just do a generous amount of spritzes of the perfume. And then once that's done, you shake that up a little bit, and then you can pour in distilled water. And what that does is it just really dilutes the fragrance, spreads it out, and it's such a soft, delicate scent that it in no way overpowers anything. And it's something that you'll hardly notice when you're in bed, but it's just these little tiny touches that add a little bit of extra specialness to a guest room or even your own room. Anytime I've ever stayed at a nice hotel, I always pay attention to what housekeeping is doing. And sometimes I ask them questions about how they do this or that. And it's actually how I found the sheet set. So it's just one of those things that if you do get the chance to go somewhere nice, it's kind of just a fun opportunity to see how other people do things and possibly give you some ideas on things you can adopt in your own house. My mom taught me that if you wait to tuck in that top sheet until you've got that first kind of thin blanket on, it's a great way to do it just because the top blanket is a lot sturdier and heavier. And if you set it back a little bit from the top, then when you tuck this in, it kind of really locks that top sheet in. And at no point are you going to be in bed kicking your toes out of the bottom, which is just the worst. It's nice to create a clean little pleat here if you can. This mattress just happens to be so obscenely heavy that I'm fairly strong and I can't hardly lift it, so getting it to look too tidy is almost impossible. The layer I'm adding right here is technically a duvet cover, and it's got a zipper and a spot for you to slip in an extra comforter. But I don't need the bed to be that hot, and maybe in winter it'll be appropriate, but right now I just like the fact that it gives you this little ruffle around the edges, and so that's why I'm using it. And the last layer will be the top comforter. I'm now folding over the top, and in most hotels they actually do this underneath the comforter, and then the comforter kind of gets folded in half and sits towards the end of the bed. But I personally like how this looks, and I think it's important to keep in mind that you should find a way to make a bed that makes you happy, and I don't know that there's too many right or wrong ways to do this. Now that we're on to pillowcases, I will share another really great tip that I have discovered is when you are preparing a bed for a guest, I like to have a number of pillows on the bed, and I like them to vary in density. So Some of them are extremely soft, some of them are kind of medium, and some are pretty firm because everyone has a personal preference. And it's just one more thing you can do to communicate to your guests that they are important to you and that you're thinking of their comfort. All right, the bed is all fresh and nicely made and ready for guests. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I can't wait to share more of these types of episodes with you. So until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again very soon.